Section 9 of the Best Short Stories of 1917. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Rel. The Best Short Stories of 1917 by Various. The Emperor of Elam by H.G. Dwight. Part 2. Dua. When the white motorboat had disappeared in the glitter of the Abides, Signor Machin, not unlike other fallible human beings, when released from the necessity of keeping up a pitch, appeared to lose something of his gracious humor. So it transpired, did his decorative boatman, who had not expected to row 25 miles upstream at a time when most people in that climate seek the relief of their sirdabs, which are underground chambers cooled by running water, it may be, and by a tall badjir, or air chimney. The running water, to be sure, was here, and had already begun to carry the barge down the Karun. If the high banks of that tawny stream constituted a species of air chimney, however, such air as moved therein was not calculated for relief. But when Brazilians command, even a lure may obey. These lures, at all events, propelled their galley back to the basin of Bundaker, and on into the Abishatet, which is the westerly of those two halves of the Karun. Before nightfall, the barge had reached the point where navigation ends. There Machin sent his major domo ashore to procure mounts, and at sunset the two of them, followed by a horseboy, rowed northward 6 or 7 miles, till the city of Schuster rose dark above them in the summer evening, on its rock that cleaves the Karun in two. The bazaar by which they entered the town was deserted at that hour, save by dogs that set up a terrific barking at the sight of strangers. Here the carvadar lighted a vast white linen lantern, which he proceeded to carry in front of the two riders. He seemed to know where he was going, for he led the way without a pause through long, blank, silent streets of indescribable filth and smells. The gloom of them was deepened by jutting balconies, and by innumerable badjirs that cut out a strange black fretwork against amazing stars. At last the three stopped in front of a gate in the vicinity of the citadel. This was not one of the gateways that separate the different quarters of Schuster, but a door in a wall, recessed in a tall arch and ornamented with an extraordinary variety of iron clamps, knobs, locks, and knockers. Of one of the latter the carvadar made repeated use until someone shouted from inside. The horseboy shouted back, and presently his lantern caught a glitter of 2 eyes in a slit. The eyes belonged to a cautious doorkeeper, who, after satisfying himself that the visitors were not enemies, admitted the Brazilian and the lure into a vaulted brick vestibule. Then, having looked to his wards and bolts, he lighted Machin through a corridor which turned into a low tunnel-like passage. This led into a sort of cloister, where a covered ambulatory surrounded a dark pool of stars. Thence another passage brought them out into a great open court. Here an invisible jet of water made an illusion of coolness in another, larger pool, overlooked by a portico of tall, slim pillars. Between them Machin caught the glow of a cigar. "Good evening, Gons," his bass voice called from the court. "Hevan, is that you?" replied the smoker of the cigar. "What are you doing here, in God's name?" I imagined you at Mohammed by this time, or even in the Gulf." This remark, it may not be irrelevant to say, was in German, as spoken in the trim town of Zurich. "And so I should have been," replied the polyglot Mahin in the same language, mounting the steps of the portico and shaking his friend's hand, "but for all sorts of things. If we ran aground once, we ran aground 3,000 times. I begin to wonder if we shall get through the reefs at Awaz with all the rubbish I have on board." "Ah, bah, you can manage going down. But why do you waste your time in Schuster with all that is going on in Europe?" Grunted Mahin. "What is going on in Europe?" "A great family is wearing well-cut mourning, and a small family is beginning to turn green." "How does that affect two quiet nomads in the Elam, especially when one of them is a Swiss and one a Brazilian?" He laughed and lighted a cigar the other offered him. "My dear Gans, it is an enigma to me how a man who can listen to such a fountain and admire such stars can perpetually sigh after the absurdities of Europe. Which reminds me that I met an Englishman this morning." "Well, what of that? Are Englishmen so rare?" "Alas, no, though I notice, my good Gans, that you do your best to thin them out. This specimen was too typical for me to be able to describe him. Younger than usual, possibly. Yellow hair, blue eyes, constrained manner, everything to sample. He calls himself Mark or Matthew. Rather the apostolic air, too, except that he was in the oil company's motor boat. But he gave me to understand that he was not in the oil company." "Quite so." "I saw for myself that he knows nothing about archaeology. Who is he? Lynch? Bank? Telegraph?" "He's not lunch, he's not bank, and he's not telegraph. Neither is he consul or even that famous record. He's English." And Gans let out a chuckle at the success of his own characterization. "Ah, so?" exclaimed Mahin elaborately. "I hear, by the way, that famous railroad is not marching so fast. The Lures don't like it, but sometimes even Englishmen," he added, "have reasons for doing what they do. This one, at any rate, seemed more inclined to ask questions than to answer them. I confess I don't know whether it was because he had nothing to say, or whether he preferred not to say it. Is he perhaps a son of Papa, making the grand tour?" "More or less. Papa gave him no great letter of credit, though. He came out to visit some of the oil people, and he's been here long enough to learn quite a lot of Persian." "So he starts this morning, I take it, from Shalalalia. But why the devil does he go to Disful by himself?" "And why the devil shouldn't he? He's out here, and he wants to see the sights.
such as they are. So he's going to take a look at the ruins of Susa, and at your wonderful unspoilt Disful. Shil Ali Khan will be delighted to get a few tomans for his empty house by the river. Then the 21st, you know, is the coronation. So I gave him a letter to the Father of Swords, who...
Thunder and lightning! Machin's heavy voice resounded in the portico, very like a bellow. You, Gans, sent this man to the Father of Swords? He might be one of those lieutenants from India who go smelling around in their holidays, so pink and innocent.
What is that to me?
Demanded the Swiss, raising his own voice.
Or to you, Ziza? After all, Signor Machin, are you the Emperor of Elam?
The Brazilian laughed. Not yet, and naturally it's nothing to you when you cash him checks and sell him 10 cows and quinine. But for a man who perpetually sighs after Europe, Herr Gans, and for a Swiss of the North, you strike me as betraying a singular lack of sensibility to certain larger interests of your race. However, what concerns me is that you should have confided to this young man, with such a roll of sentimental eyes as I can imagine, that Disful is still unspoiled. If Disful is unspoiled, he might spoil it. I've found some very nice things up there, you know. I was even fool enough to show him one or two.
Bah, he likes to play tennis and shoot. You know these English boys.
Machin considered those English boys in silence for a moment. Yes, I knows them. This one told me he liked a bit of a lark. I know myself what a lark it is to navigate the Abides at the end of July. But what is most curious about these English boys is that when they go out for a bit of a lark, they come home with Egypt or India in their pocket. Have you noticed that, Gans? That's their idea of a bit of a lark, and with it all they are still children. What can one do with such people? A bit of a lark. Well, you will perhaps make me a little annoyance, Mr. Adolf Gans, by sending your English boy up to Disful to have a bit of a lark. However, he'll either give himself a sunstroke or get himself bitten in two by a shark. He asked me about the channel, and I had an inspiration. I told him he would have no trouble. So he will go full speed, and we shall see what we shall see. Do you sell coffins, Mr. Gans, in addition to all your other valuable merchandise?
Naturally,
Mr. Machin, replied the Swiss. Do you need one? But you haven't explained to me yet why you give me the pain of saying goodbye to you a second time. Partly, Mr. Gans, because I am tired of sleeping in an oven, and partly because I, the Father of Swords, has asked me to run up to Balabala before I leave. But principally because I need a case or two more of your excellent vin de champagne, manufactured out of Persian petroleum, the water of the Karun, the nameless abominations of Schuster, and the ever-effervescing impudence of the Swiss Republic.
what can I do?
smiled the flattered author of this concoction.
I have to use what I can get in this God-forsaken place.
And I suppose you will end by getting a million, eh?
No such luck, but I'm getting a piano. Did I tell you? A bluthna? It's already on the way up from Mohammed. A bluthna and Schuster? God in heaven, why did you wait until I had gone? Well, aren't you still here?
The fact of Mahin's being still there, so unexpectedly, hung in his mind.
By the way, speaking of the father of swords, did you give him an order?
I gave him an order. Didn't you pay it?
I thought twice about it, for unless you have struck oil up in that country of yours where nobody goes, or gold, Mr. Adolph Gans,
remarked the Brazilian with some pointedness, all I ask of you is to respect my signature and to keep closed that many-tongued mouth of yours. I sometimes fear that in you the banker is inclined to exchange confidences with the chemist, or even with the son of Papa who cashes a check, eh? Gans cleared his throat.
In that case,
he rejoined,
all you have to do is to ask him when you meet him again at Bala Bala, and the English bank will no doubt be happy to accept the transfer of your account.
Mahin began to chuckle. We assert our dignity. Never mind, Adolphe. As a matter of fact, I have a high opinion of your discretion, so high that when I found the Imperial Bank of Elam, I shall put you in charge of it. And you did me a real service by sending that motor boat across my bow this morning, for in it I discovered just the chauffeur I have been looking for. I am getting tired of my galley, you know.
You will see something when I come back. But,
Gans asked after a moment,
do you really expect to come back?
But what else should I do? Ends my days sneezing and sniveling by some polite lake of Zurich, like you, my poor Gans, when you find in your hand the magic key that might unlock for you any door in the world? That, for example, is not my ideal of a lark, as your son of Papa would say. Men are astounding animals, I admit, but I never could live in Europe, where you can't turn around without stepping on someone else's toes. I want your room, I want your air, I want your light. And for a collector, you know, America is after all a little bare, while here—
Oh God!
cried Adolph Gans out of his dark Persian portico. End of section 9.